One. All right, cool. I think everything's working. Hopefully I'm not too loud. I'm not too quiet. We're good? All right, cool. Everyone, thank you for showing up, for coming. Ever since, and actually that's a little loud. Pull it down. On the leftish, okay. Got to get a good shot. Awesome, thanks. About a month and a half ago, for any Drupalers out there, we had DrupalCon in town. And after DrupalCon was done, for some reason, I had this crazy bug that this town does not have a Sass or like specific front-end meetup group. And I thought that was really sad. I've got a friend up in Seattle, Dale, who gave a presentation at DrupalCon, who leads up the Seattle meetup group. And I was always jealous. It was like, why do they have a meetup up there? Why can't I get to Seattle for something like that? And it just kind of occurred to me that it's not going to happen unless I do it. So I should just shut up and start doing it. So I put a random post out on Google+, and it kind of steamrolled from there. And the people that are showing up tonight are all because of that. And so I really appreciate that of people showing up. There's a lot of people I don't know, which is really cool. So it's not just like my friends coming to pity me or something like that. And then there's all the friends that didn't show up that I get to heckle and say, why weren't you here to support me? So real quick, just to give an introduction, my name is, let's go next slide. Or, sorry, that's not you, it's me. I control the slides. All right, so my name is Micah. There's my Twitter handle. I work for a company called Lullabot. We are a Drupal shop mainly that do mostly like large media sites. Like we do the Grammys website, those kind of scales, that kind of media. And I'm one of their front-end developers for them. And what else I wanted to say? What was I going to say? So the point of this meetup is obviously one of the big focuses that has just changed what we do and how we do it is Sass. Sass, obviously the preprocessor. If you don't know about it and you just came because it sounded cool, we can talk later. I'll be happy to get you set up. But Sass has really changed the way that front-end development happens. And I think over this last 6 months, we keep saying the way that front-end development happens change. We're now talking about our designers doing a lot more of the code writing, and our job as a front-end developer now being more of like creating systems. So even our role is starting to change. And it's really neat to see how that continues to evolve. And at every single step of that, Sass is there because it empowers us to create systems, to create functions, to create all of our mixins and extends and all those pieces. So that's kind of why we're meeting. I tacked on Sass and front end, because I certainly don't want to limit it just to talk Sass every single week. There's things like Grunt I would love to talk about. Lots of JavaScript frameworks. Angular I've been getting into that I'd love to have those kind of topics be able to come out as well. So on that, if there's anyone, we don't have a speaker for next month. So if no one else steps up and I'm able to find someone, you're going to have to listen to me again, which will get really boring really quick. So we're looking for people to do that. If you want to talk to me afterwards or hit me up on G+ or Twitter, that would be awesome, because we're going to try and hopefully schedule out the next couple months and get that worked out. So that's what the group is. We're meeting once a month, second Thursday, 6 p.m. as that first slide said. One quick note is that PDX Sass, that's Twitter account for this meetup. I'm going to try and put up a lot of stuff there. If you're not following it, please do. And actually for that, I'm going to do a quick little thing. Okay, everyone has a phone or a computer, right? Go follow PDX Sass, and there is a post there. We're actually streaming this live on a Google Hangout, which is also getting recorded, so if anyone misses it, they're able to do that. If people would be willing to, and this is an experiment on social experiments to see if it actually happens, just post the link to the live feed. If people are willing to retweet that, I've got t-shirts that I'll be happy to pass out to some of those people to retweet. I'll pick a couple at random, and you'll get some free t-shirts. How's that for incentive, right? Everyone loves swag. All right, we'll see if it works or not. But on that note, a couple things for our sponsors, since they made this happen. For one, Puppet Labs, which you're sitting in right now. This space is seriously awesome. Has anyone been here before? This first time for most people? Most people it's new. Okay, glad you found it for the first place. Not always the easiest thing to find. But this is seriously an amazing space, and they're giving it to us at no charge whatsoever. We have like 4 kegs over there. Please don't empty them, but we have them available to us. That's not the point. We're not trying to empty them. They are like, please drink our beer. How amazing is that? So they are an amazing, gracious host. We obviously want to extend the courtesy back to them and just say thank you for that. The other is Drupalize Me. Drupalize Me is the education arm of Lullabot. So yes, they are a little bit attached, and I'll give that, we'll qualify in there. But Drupalize Me is a video service for an educational video service that has everything. They mostly focus on Drupal, but do a lot of things on getting up on command line and Git, and actually that Sass series they did just a little bit ago. It's a great place if you are a front-end developer and you're trying to find a niche. Drupal is exploding, seriously exploding with front-end development, the need for it. That was probably the biggest thing I got out of DrupalCon, was like every single front-end session just crammed full of people that are trying to figure this stuff out. So if that's something that you want to consider, is moving into a different realm, get involved in Drupal. It doesn't take that much to get the basics of Drupal to start doing development, at least on the front-end side of it. You don't have to get in all the crazy PHP to do the work, do the work that I do. I rarely touch PHP. It's mostly just understand the systems. And Drupalize Me is an amazing service for that. And they're going to provide a ton of pizza that I hope we have a lot of people here to eat. So just a big thank you to them. So that's mostly it for the introductions. Chris Bloom, who a lot of you probably know, is kind of co-leading this with me. He had a little bit of a minor class emergency. He teaches at the Portland Art Institute. And they had someone drop, and someone was willing to come in and take over a class. So he's kind of going over there to babysit for a little bit of it. So he was going to tag team this with me, and we were going to have a little bit more variety in speaking voices and pitches. But unfortunately, you just have me tonight. So, but he should be here in the future as well. So kind of keep an eye out for him. At the end of this, after the talk I give, we are going to have a chance. I know a lot of companies, Puppet included, are hiring like crazy. At a lot of our Drupal meetup groups, we have like 5, 6, 7, 8 different people raise their hands, say our company's hiring, our company's hiring. I do want to give an opportunity for that because this meetup is really about connecting people. It's about giving them the tools to learn and the connections to find that next step. So if there are people with companies, I know Lullabot, we're always taking applications. We kind of have that other spot when we find the right person. We'd love to bring them on. So we'll have a chance for that at the end of it. So I'm going to go ahead. We have a couple people retweet for free t-shirts. retweet for free t-shirts, sweets. Hope I'll give a couple away. So get your Sass in line. Here's my presentation and my water. This talk came about as I came on a little about 6 months ago. And before that, I had been working mostly just solo kind of work, or just maybe really just me within like being a designer or something like that. Coming to Lullabot, much larger teams, much larger, like 5, 6 people on a team. So you'll have multiple people actually touching the Sass, which is before it was pretty much just me. So if I knew I tucked that stupid thing at the bottom of the CSS sheet, I could get back to it. It wasn't a big deal. But now that we've got people being onboarded, we have to be eventually passing the stuff off to a client. I need to have some kind of a structure. I need to have some kind of organization that's going to be like repeatable, that's going to be like expectable. Then I'm also going to be able to create documentation for it. I don't have to create documentation, like different documentation every single time I do a project. So this talk kind of came out from that, of what are the tools that we use when we develop with Sass to make that easier. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them. Hey, look, there's 3. How's the purple? Can you see that? Kinda? Okay. That's a Sass purple. I decided to use it. I got feedback that purple might be hard to see, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so 3 things I'm going to talk about tonight. Hopefully get through them relatively quick, and I'm glad I can see a clock so I can see how long it's going to take. We do have pizza coming at 7, so I hope everyone is starving, because we have a lot coming from Hot Lips, so it'll be really good. Sorry, that's a tangent. So the 3 things we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about mixins, we're going to be talking about extends, and then we're going to get into kind of just a general organizational talk. If you don't know what mixins or extends are, or the difference between them, I just actually had a chance to tell one of our coworkers, kind of give that explanation just, I think, yesterday. So, there's still some ambiguity. So I'll be happy to kind of go over that, and that's what we're going to do. So mixins, or as I say, APIs, or how I learned to stop worrying. I love abstraction. So mixins, I'll just give the quick, it's always remembering, what do I have in my slides? All right, yeah, we'll get to that. So the idea of a mixin is oftentimes you'll have similar code being used over and over again that just has slight variations. So a button, which is what I'm going to show off here real quick, is a good example of that. You might have a button that's really common throughout the site, but you have different variations of it. You have a couple different colors, a couple different sizes, those types of things. All the same code, except for maybe 1 or 2 things that you'd like to be able to vary. Icon fonts and sprites are another example of that. Is you might have like a real specific like pseudo class that you're using for your icon fonts, and it's all the same except the name of the font or whatever that like content attribute is. And you want to be able to repeat those, abstract that away, so that when someone comes in and goes, I need to change this from a thumbs up button to a thumbs down button, they don't have to recreate the entire icon font every single time they need to do that, or if they need to add one or something like that. So being able to abstract those things into small mixins where you can just pass in a variable or 2 is powerful. It really helps with teams. It helps with usability for maybe less technical people down the road that are using and making updates to that system. And same with buttons. If the button needs to change from big to small, it's great to be able to just pass in some kind of variable into that mixin and be able to do that. So let's look at a quick mixin. Again, this is very simple. It's missing a lot of stuff, but it kind of gives you a quick idea. So we've got a mixin. It's called button, or BTN, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to be able to pass in 2 things. I'm going to be able to pass in a color and a text color. And you can pass in lots of other stuff, but this is just a quick example. So in doing that, every time I call a mixin, as you can see down here, I can say include the button. And in this case, I'm going to say purple and white. And then for another selector, I'm going to say this bluish thing and black. So every single time I want to call that mixin, I can pass in different values to it. And as you can see, what happens is those colors, the color and then the text, just get placed into the mixin like variables. So your background becomes that color. Your color becomes whatever you passed in for text. And then you can also do cool things. Like for the border, I want to just have a little bit darker. Like just take that background color and darken it up a little bit. I don't want to know what that color is. I don't care. Whenever I change it, I don't want to have to go to some calculator and refigure out what that color is. So a little Sass function will allow you to darken the color by 10%, and you're good to go. And the great thing is if you come back later and you go like, you know, these buttons just don't have enough pop, right? That's what everyone asks. I just want some more pop for my buttons. You can go in there and change that 10% to 20%. Every single button on your site gets updated. And that's the idea of abstraction, APIs, is being able to create these tools where everything has a consistent base, and then whenever you need to change something or add something, say now all my buttons need drop shadows. Well, crap, how are we going to do that? You can just add the drop shadows in there. And if you need to add more inputs into that mixin, you can do that as well. So it's an API. It allows you to have this interface between what you're asking for and what you actually get. A really, really powerful tool. So mixin output is like this. Whenever you use a mixin, you're going to get a complete, fresh copy of that CSS. So for every button you use, you're going to get background value, you're going to get color, and border radius. So you see we have border radius here twice. It's because it's a mixin. It's going to print border radius every time that you use it. And that's really one of the big differences between extends and includes, is that with a mixin, whenever you use a mixin, you're going to repeat that code. So just kind of remember that. If this is something that doesn't ever need a change, it might not need to be a mixin. But mixins do allow you to make those changes as you go. So other things you might be able to do with mixin, I kind of alluded to this before as well, is you can do icon fonts. You can also use them for media queries. I'm actually going to show a quick example of that here in a second. The idea of being able to abstract your media query out. So instead of writing the actual @media, min width, and then even if you're using a variable, I mean, you can do better than that. And I'll show you here in a second. Sprites, shapes like triangles and speech bubbles, or the dreaded triangles at the bottom of lines. Josh, I get to pick on Josh because he's my designer, and he gave me one of those like, ah, crap, dude, really? You want me to design that? That's horrible. I hate doing those. And you know it. No, just kidding. Yeah, then he told me, well, then it could be done with a filter, is what he showed me. It's the idea of, like, you have a line, and then you have like a little triangle, just a little, pointing out on the bottom of that line. Designers love it. Developers hate it because they're a pain to do. So a couple options. You can use like a CSS triangle. Okay, you can use CSS triangles. It's easy. But if you try and use a drop shadow on a CSS triangle, you get a box with a 1/4 of it actually filled in. CSS filters, on the other hand, actually do work. A little side note, a little extra for you. But support for that's going to be horrible. And of course, you need to use that filter for everything, for consistency. Blah. But if you need to do triangles or speech bubbles or something, that's something you could actually create within a mixin. And anytime you need to use it, you pass in a variable of like a color or a size or something like that, and just abstract all that away. So anytime you need to use it, it's always the same code. I mean, something like a clear fix. That needs to be abstracted away because you're going to use the same code every single time. Sometimes some things, get some variation, like triangles, like what direction, that kind of stuff, what colors. So those are a lot of things you can do with mixins. So here's an example of using a mixin for our media queries. And this is, this is pulled straight from the one I've been using for the last couple projects. And the idea here is you could do this. You could create several variables, desktop, tablet, phone, which of course you shouldn't use because you don't want to do media queries for devices, right? But anyway, you might do it anyway. I do it sometimes. All right. You could just create variables and pass it on in. Media screen and min width of desktop. And you could just change desktop anytime you want, and then all those media queries would update. Right? Great. The perfect solution? I say no. I think you can do better. That's not abstracted enough. All I can do is pass a value through. There's nothing else that I can do when that media query gets called. So the idea is, and hopefully I'm not standing in front of it the entire time, so maybe I will move over. Okay. Well, for them, not for the camera. All right. I can stand here. I'm in. I'm good. So the idea is to create a mixin that's going to handle all of this. So the mixin's going to still take that desktop value and it's going to pass it into the mixin. And then once we're there, we can do anything we want. Really, we can do anything we want with this mixin. So in the case like, at desktop, you want that sidebar to float left. So this is what it looks like. This is a real simple version of the mixin. So this mixin is called respond to. It takes a width Great. So we're just going to do our at media screen and mid-width of width. It's exactly the same, right? So it's like, why is that better? Is that really helping you out at all? And this content that I showed right here, basically what this does is whatever you have inside of that mixin. So you say, actually let me back up and show you. So anything that's here, anything that gets put inside of the curly braces, that becomes the content. So you can actually use the content when you're inside of there. Really powerful. That's one of the best things about mixins. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. So this is great. This is wonderful. And then someone comes over and says to you, well, you know, you're doing mobile first, right? Well, that's great. Everyone, you should be doing mobile first. I love it. But we need to support IE8. And IE8 doesn't support media queries. So all of your large media queries that are making sidebars float and stuff like that, IE8, it ain't getting them. What do? You could go to JavaScript. You could go to like respond.js. A great tool if you got to use it. Not always the best choice. It does have a bit of performance overhead. It is a little bit of code bloat. And personally, I don't really want IE8 responsive. I would much rather give them just like one fixed size, and that's all you get. Because once you start getting to those other media queries and like all the touch stuff, and you're like, I don't even want IE8 going there. You're not going to be able to support it. We're going to give it desktop. I've never had a client complain about that because that's really what they're expecting. If nothing else, they're going to complain. When I change the size of the window, the website changes. That's usually the complaint you get. So, so rant aside, what do? Well, if you have abstracted your media queries out, you have an opportunity to change what happens when you use those media queries. You don't have to just accept at media screen with content. You can add stuff. Woohoo! We can then say if it's anytime this goes through, it's going to go into the media query, but it's also going to take the selector. This is kind of more an advanced Sass thing. This little and symbol is going to grab whatever your selector, your CSS selector was, and it's going to pop it in there. So what's happening here is kind of cool. What we're saying is IE8, and if you've used like HTML5 boilerplate or anything like that, these are little conditionals that go into the header statement. So anytime IE8 comes up, it throws this little conditional class up top. So what this means is that all of your like float left, they're only going to happen when you're at that desktop size for most browsers. For IE8, on the other hand, it can't see those media queries. It's going to completely ignore them. They're gone. It doesn't even see them. Doesn't even care. But for IE8, which does match the selector, it's going to use that float left anyway. So what this allows us to do is actually create an IE8 specific layout for that site. So we can have everything normal for everything else because this is totally namespaced away. You're never going to use IE8. Please never use IE8 anywhere in your site if you wanted to survive anything like this. And you can create an entire fixed static width view for IE8. And this is just this is a small thing. I mean, there's lots of other things you can do. The point is, you have all of it's a matter of you've got the content as a variable. You've got what's being passed in as a variable. You can do anything you want. You can do conditional statements. You can print it out multiple places with different namespaces. So the advantage of that mixin is it gives you that flexibility you wouldn't have if you just said at media screen min width of desktop. So that's the power of a mixin as an API. Is that if you need to come back and add some functionality, you've got one function. You've got one place where you can put that into. And it's happened to me multiple times. It happens to me with like icon fonts and stuff like that. It's like, oh, we need to do something for these icon fonts conditionally. Okay, sure. I've got a mixin for that. It's handling everything. So no problem. So those are mixins. As far as extends, and I didn't read this over, but you might have saw it. Did he really say the return of presentational classes? Really? Presentational classes like large text and float left and green border and round corners, are these the classes that we're actually going to use? And your response should be, it's not semantic. So, semantic classes or unsemantic classes, these don't belong in our markup, plain and simple. Green button does not belong in our markup because next year when we go through a rebranding and our buttons are no longer green, you've got a bunch of green buttons that are now blue, and it's just a chaotic mess. And you have to have like this sheet of like, okay, this color is now that, and this is now that, and it's ridiculous. But return of semantic classes. The idea is with an extend, you can actually, my next slide, you can actually create something like a purple header as an extend and then use that anywhere you want. Because if that purple header does change to blue, okay, you can do a find and replace and change purple to blue, and life will go on. So the other thing you can do is leave out the unsemantic stuff and just say like this is a secondary header and just be better about it. But the idea with an extend is it's a class that you can extend other places. So you see I've got two examples of it here. I've got a little widget and it's an H2. And can you read this okay from the back? Are those fonts big enough? Awesome, even all the way back. So in this case of my widget, H2, I'm going to extend that purple header. And then in another case, in my blog, the title over there, which is not an H2. It's something else. It's a div. Whoever set that up, that's all they gave me was div, title. So I can then also extend purple header. And what that's going to give me is this. My widget H2 and my blog role title as two selectors for those sets of styles. So the main differences we're going to see here is that we haven't repeated these styles. The styles are printed once in your CSS sheet. And if you're doing this a lot, that's going to save you lots and lots of bytes in your CSS sheet. So smaller CSS sheet. And performance-wise, if you had, say like you had 5,000 of these, because I've tested. You can have actually 5,000 selectors for a single one before even IE crooks, or the 4,000, whatever, 28 that it does. That as an extend versus a mix-in. So if you had like 5,000 selectors in these 3 lines versus 5,000 selectors that all had their own 3 lines, the performance gain is huge. It's like a 4 times performance gain. So you're going to be getting smaller CSS files and also better performance. Just the browser is able to do it faster and better. So the advantages with using an extend like this is that we actually can start naming our stuff with a little bit more of a presentational name. We can say, you know, this is going to be our like orange background, or this is going to be like a rounded corner, or this is going to be how we do our titles, or how we do our copy, or something like that. They don't have to be semantic because they're not actually showing up in, and I guess I can explain that a little better. Purple header up there. This is a silent selector. So really, it's just a name for these. Are people kind of familiar? I'm trying like extends. Are people great with them? Kind of. Sure. Yeah, that's kind of like how much I assume. Typically, when you do an extend, you can extend anything. You can extend a class. You can extend another ID. You can really extend. You can extend your p tags for whatever. But the problem with that is anytime you extend something, you extend every single instance of that thing. And it's bitten me a couple times. So in the case of like, if I extended my p tags because you know, the p's got like a, you know, the certain line heights and font and the colors that I like. So I'm going to extend the p element. Well, the problem with that is it extends the p element, but it also extends the content p element, and it also extends the, you know, sidebar p element, and it also extends my widget p element. So it extends every p element. And if that makes sense, you're going to have a lot of code bloat, unexpected things happen. So the percent sign, what it does, it makes a silent selector. This thing, if I never extend that, it'll never print. It'll never get into my CSS sheet. So there's 2 advantages with this. For one, if I'm never going to use that somewhere else, it's never going to be, you know, in sidebar, you know, purple header. So I don't have any fear of accidentally extending more than one thing. But the second thing is, if I never use it, it never shows up. So I mean, think of something like Twitter Bootstrap. It's like, yay, Twitter Bootstrap. Wow, code bloat. There's so much in there, and I never use like a 1/10 of it. That's because it's an entire CSS sheet that you load in. Now, if you're using silent selectors, the only time that anything would ever get printed in your CSS is if you extend it. Everything else is invisible. And it's really, really nice. Say if you're doing, a really good example, even though I wouldn't use it, is if you're doing all of your grids as classes, this is a perfect use case for that. You do all of your grids like column 1 of 6, column 2 of 6, column 3 of 6, column 4 of 6. All of those classes, you do them as silent, so they won't get printed unless you use them. So you might have like, you know, 100,000 of these things. but they won't actually get in your CSS sheet unless you use them in an extend. So extends looks like this. We can certainly do a lot more on it. But what they allow you to do is basically create a more of a presentational class and then continue to use that throughout your site. I did this really extensively in a internet project I did recently, where pretty much everything on the site was really maybe one of 3 or 4 different types. So if it was a header, it was one of 4 different headers. If it was body, if it was copy, it was one of 4 different copy. If it was really anything, if it was a button, it was one of a couple buttons or something like that. So everything was basically extended off just a couple of headings, a couple of like kind of decorative stuff that I extended out of. So everything can get, everything basically relates back to those extends. And the advantage here, obviously, is if everything's related back to those, it's really easy to update them. It's easy to say, like my titles aren't always H2s. Sometimes they're an H2, sometimes they're a dot title. It's a real pain to go through and find all of those things that are supposed to look like a title and update them. So if I create an extend and just have everything extend that one, it's really easy to go in here and add a few more styles, change a couple styles, do whatever you need to make that happen. So extends are just, they're really powerful in allowing you to have more presentational classes and use them without the pitfalls of a presentational class. Because there's plenty of pitfalls for presentational classes. So as I said, with this would be the output. A single instance of those styles, and for every single time that you extended it, all those selectors would be up there in that row. So you might have 10, 15, 20 of them. It's not pretty when you inspect it, but it's performant, and it makes really small CSS files. So it's a very, very good thing. So this would be your header. It would be purple. It would have a border bottom, 1 pixel solid white, and font size of 2 M's. Believe me, that's 2 M's. I measured it. Just kidding. All right. So I think that's good. We're doing good for time. So this is really kind of where it comes together. And I stepped out of it. There we go. Is organizing everything. A place for everything, and everything in its place. So the problem is, if you have a new developer come into your project, and there's a new widget that needs to get styled, or a widget that has a title that never got styled, or something like that, how does that developer know where to put that code? You know, if you have a single style sheet, of course, that's even tougher. It's like, where in this humongous style sheet do I put that piece of code? Does it go up here with the headers? Does it go down with that widget? Does it go down in this other place that kind of has related stuff? There's as many ways to organize your CSS files as there are people in this room. Everyone's going to do it a little different. And when someone gets onboarded into a project, they're not going to have a clue which person did it and which crazy mind frame they were at the time when they created it. So what we want to do is we want to make a place for everything and then make sure everything is actually in its place, is what it comes down to. So what I'm going to talk about is an example file structure. And this is the file structure that I've been using. And I think we're kind of, I think all of us at Lullabot are kind of coming to the same file structure. It's slightly based off Smacks. So if you've seen Jonathan Snook talk about it at all, it has a lot of similarities to that, but it's a little bit more Sass focused. So there's a couple things that are a little bit different, but certainly still the same kind of similarities. We have a global base layout and component. And I'm going to walk through each one of those and kind of explain what goes in each one, so that if I say, hey, I need to style this, hopefully you'll be able to say, oh, that should probably go in the base, and it's going to go in the HTML file, something like that. So let's do that. Let's talk about the global first. So global, for me, typically comes down to 4 different things. To give a quick explanation of what global is, and I think it's my next slide, but who cares, is that global is everything that does not print. So it's like, why do you have all this stuff that never actually makes it in your CSS file? Well, global is all of your functions, all of your variables, all of your extends, all of your mixins. So everything that's basically all of your tool chest. Like, here's all the things that I use. Here's all the variables I've set up for this project. Everything is kind of set the project ready to go. And the advantage of this, and extracting this all into one folder, is that if you have, like, I just had a recent project, actually it's the same internet project, that we needed to make a newsletter. And with the newsletter we were using, we needed a separate CSS file for it. And so to do that, we had to start up a completely new Sass file that was going to get compiled and outputted. The nice thing was we could just import my global directory And I had all the colors, I had all the mix-ins, I had everything I needed to actually build all that stuff. I had all the brand colors, I had all the fonts, I had everything I needed to easily make that other style sheet with all of those same font stacks and colors and mix-ins and everything. So it allows you to spin those up really easy. If you need to do an IE8 one, or you just, if you have a mobile site or something like that, there's a lot of, it's really just easy to bootstrap another Sass file, is what it comes down to. So talking about each one of them real quick. Functions, if you're not familiar with functions in Sass, they're pretty awesome. They're kind of similar to a mix-in, and they take input and they give you output. But they're usually a little bit more simple, a little bit more defined. Like, for instance, they only have a single output. So you call a function and you get a return value of 10 or pi or blue or chicken or whatever the case is. So a function's going to do that for you. A couple of really good use cases: pixels to ems. So if you're like, you should be using ems, you should be using ems, but my brain works in pixels. Well, you can create a function, and I usually just call it like PEM, pixels to em, where you just pass in the pixel value, and it does simple math for you. It's not that complicated. Usually just divide by 16, and it gives you an m value. So if you pass in 11, I don't know what 11 divided by 16 is. I shouldn't have to know what 11 by 16 is. So that function can easily do that for you and give you that m value. Removing units. Sometimes you'll need to you pass in something and it's got pixels on it, and you want to remove the pixels from it and have that value as just 11. So you can use 11 for whatever you're doing. You'd have to see it in use, but I've certainly used it a few times. That's something like a function. So usually just kind of useful, helpful little tidbits. Variables. I try and put as much as possible with variables in the variables folder. If you've used Zerb, Zerb's huge on variables. They'll probably go even further with it than I typically do. And like everything's in a variable. All of your colors, all of your fonts, all of your stacks, all of like this flag turned on, this flag turned off. It's pretty incredible what they've done in a system of variables. So I try and pull everything out I can into a variable and put all of those in one place. Your font stacks, all of your colors, all of your sizes, really everything. So that when you build a lot of these actual Sass files, you're not even writing numbers. Because if you have to write, and this is, I think Chris Coyer kind of coined this, so if he didn't, sorry for the person that did, is the idea of a magic number. A magic number is a number that you have to put in to make it work. Because that's the only number in that instance that will work. Magic numbers are bad. You want to have a system that works well and works regardless of whatever those numbers are in there. So 100% works a lot better than 100 pixels, because that thing you're trying to match might not be 100 pixels sometime. It might be 120, and now you're off. So those kind of things. So everything you put into variables, even if it's like an offset. Like sometimes I'll do like the offset between blocks on a page is 60 pixels. I'll put that in a variable because I'm going to use that 3 or 4 times in a couple different places. And if it ever changes, I don't want to have to go back and find all those places that it changes. So variables are awesome. Your grid variables, I support. Compass does this a lot. So really anything you could abstract out that's going to be used in multiple places, it's handy to have it in a variables. We talked about extends. Typically I'll have like a set of title extends, which is all of my headings. So I have multiple ones to choose from. Sometimes I do a copy extend with like a different copy treatments. So you might have like a block quote treatment, you might have paragraph treatment, you might have like a teaser treatment, those kind of things. And again, you can just extend to those and reuse those styles anytime you want. And then decorative extends. Decorative extends, I had a decorative extend that was as simple as border bottom gray. That was the entire extend. There wasn't anything else to it. But the thing was that I wanted to keep using that because if the customer came back and said like, we like that border, but we also want something else to happen. Well, crap, now I got to go to every place it's used and add that something else. So instead, I used an actual extend. So if it needs to be border bottom and, I don't know, like a drop shadow or something like that, I can do that. I can just add that in, it all connects, and it's all good to go. And again, we talked about mix-ins. So you might have like a respond to mix-ins, your font icon mix-ins. Mix-ins, again, anytime, really the only time you're using mix-ins is when the output you're expecting is going to change depending on some kind of variable you pass in. If it doesn't change, it's probably a good use for an extend instead. So that is our global directory. So as I kind of said before, global directories contain all of your non-printing styles, and this allows for a single folder that can bootstrap any new style sheet. And that's powerful. I mean, it's great, because you don't want to like have this, start this new file and then have to go, okay, pick that and grab this, and we need that, and oh shoot, this has that other stuff in it, we need to get rid of that. And so when all of your non-printing stuff is in one place, really easy to bootstrap a new file. And with your global directory, hypothetically, if you do all this like exactly the way that you're supposed to, and I don't always, but it's kind of the goal, is that you should be able to reskin almost your entire site just by changing out this one directory. And that's kind of a crazy thought, right? All of your colors, all of your fonts, all of your backgrounds, even your background files, all of your, even your like all of your grid layout stuff is in there, like what the actual like number of grids and stuff like that. That might be a little trickier, but you should be able to make your site completely different just by swapping in a different globals directory. Right, actually just variables and extends are really where it comes in. So that's our global directory. Again, we have functions, variables, extends, mixins. Usually I'll do each of these as a separate folder, but if it's a smaller project, I might just do each one as an individual file. There is, and I'll give you this trick now, this is a freebie. There's an amazing tool that allows this to be really easy. Typically, in Sass, you have to say like import functions, import the functions file, import the variables file, and then if you change that to a folder, well shoot, now I got to go import functions / whatever the file name is, right? Well, that gets really tough when you're constantly changing things, constantly updating things. If you're adding new files, you're reorganizing, renaming, all that. There's a great tool called Sass globbing. It's one of the strangest names out there, but it really changes the way that I work when it's going. Because what Sass globbing does is instead of saying, include functions / whatever your file name is, all I need to do is say include function folder and then ****. And it'll include everything inside that functions folder. No matter what it's called, no matter how many files, no matter how many folders deep your files are in, no matter when you change it, move it, everything, delete it, it doesn't care. It's not going to throw an error when you delete a file. That's a wonderful thing. Haha, CodeKit. Except for CodeKit. CodeKit doesn't like it. and I tweeted the author of it, and he hasn't got back to me yet, which, like, CodeKit! The problem with CodeKit is that it will see them, and it'll compile them. It won't watch them natively. It only watches the files that are explicitly included, which makes Sass globbing annoying. But that's CodeKit's fault, not Sass's fault, right? Basically what you have to do is you have to go to a file it is watching and save that one, and it'll recompile. So it's not horrible. You just have like 2 files open, but you don't want that to happen. You want it to work. But obviously, if you do a Compass watch or a Sass watch, or if you're using Grunt and doing it that way, it works fine. And I mean, the author of Sass globbing is Chris Epstein. One of the main maintainers of Sass and Compass. So it's solid. The only thing about it, and one of the reasons, actually we had a podcast with him a while ago at Lolbot, and the reason that he kept it out is because it's also a dangerous tool. Because if you are just willy-nilly throwing crap around, Sass is a cascade. I mean, that's the C of CSS. It's cascading style sheets. So order matters. With globbing, order is typically alphabetical. Kind of depends on the system you're on, which is kind of annoying. I think like Windows doesn't see underscores the same, or numbers or something like that. So it's going to basically just do them however the system decides to do it, which can be challenging unless you're actually working in a very object-oriented way. If everything is very partialed out in your styles. I personally have maybe once ran into a problem where what happens. And what I do with that case, usually it's like I have kind of like a master, say I've got like a certain widget that's got 5 different states. I've got like one master one that has a couple things I'm extending or including or something like that, and then there's the 5 states below it. Well, if the master gets called after the other ones, then it breaks and stuff screws up. But I want those together just for organizational sake. So I do like a double underscore, and that one goes up the top. life is fine, and you move on. So typically you don't have to do a lot of real, like big reorganization. Usually it's just like one thing needs to go first and everything else is fine. So that's the only thing I've run into with globbing. But anyway, so with globbing, just import the folder and put a file in there. And if you need to add more files, it's great. If you need to rename the files, it's great. If you need to add folders, reorganize. And that is really what makes doing this feasible. Because otherwise, every time you change something, add something, rename something, move something, all right, got to go back to the style.scss and find where it is and redo it. Now I'm getting error, and where is that? So Sass globbing makes that extremely easy and really powerful. Base, I'm pulling my phone out for when pizza actually gets here. So the base folder. The base folder is going to be typically, this one changes a little bit, but the main one's usually HTML and page. And the reason I do this is there are a lot of styles that aren't part of a component. Actually, I just had that had this happen to me today. I had a fixed header on the site, and I needed to do some jump leaks, like some anchor tags where you go to the anchor and then it drops down to the anchor. Well, the problem is that anchor goes right to the top of the page, right underneath our fixed header. I'm like, great, okay, this sucks. So I need to, what you can actually do is just do like a, do relative on your anchor links and move them up, and that will make it so it jumps to that, and everything is a little bit below it. So it worked great. But where do you put that? It's not part of a component, it's just anchor links. So that's kind of where a lot of this base stuff comes in. It's like everything except, and I think this is on the next slide. Oh, no, it's on a slide further on. Everything except for layout and individual components is going to be in base. And that's basically the best that I can say it. So things like our HTML file is going to, or a file folder, again, you can do it either way. Things like your font faces, those all get printed up there because obviously they're not a component, they're not a variable. You'll create your font stacks as variable, but actually calling your font faces, you got to do that somewhere, right? All of your typography, so all of your H1s and how you're doing paragraphs and your line heights and your actual HTML tag, all of that kind of stuff needs to go somewhere. And obviously HTML, hey, that's a pretty good name for it. So pretty much everything at the HTML level, everything at a global scope goes into this HTML file. As far as page, moving down to here, now in Drupal world, there's actually an HTML template and a page template. So that's kind of where the initial naming convention came from, to kind of separate those two out. So anything that has to do with actually styling what's on the HTML template goes there, and anything that's on the page template goes there. So that was kind of the main reason for separation, but it's ended up working out pretty well for this. The idea of page is that everything that's not a component, so all of your regions, it's another kind of Drupal term, and I'm sorry for all the Drupal stuff, but Drupal is kind of separated out into different regions. And typically it's just like content region, sidebar region, header region, footer region, all of that kind of stuff. They're not components. They're not going to be moving around. They're not going to be reused different places. They're the way the page looks, the way the page is laid out. So what's that footer treatment actually going to get? What's that background? What are those, I guess background's really one of the best things to say. How is that thing going to get treated, styled, shadows, and all that kind of stuff? And we're going to see an example of that in a second. And lastly, like a vendor folder is a great place to put all of your resets, formalize, bootstrap, slideshow assets. So pretty much anything that comes from a third party that you're probably not going to be messing with, but obviously you need to put it somewhere. So another great place to put it in the base. So here's an example. I just went to the Mashable website because it's the first website I thought of. And I'm like, hey, this works. So hopefully it works. So this is basically what I would be doing, what I'd be styling, and it would have what my site would look at like after I got done with the base folder. I would have basic typography. I would have regions. Like you see, it's hard to see, but this is a little bit grayer than these. You'd probably have, you might do those as headers at the top, but they're more just like region top things. So you'd style those. So each region would have its own stylings. The header would have a styling. Can't see the footer because the thing was too darn long. But you get the idea. Is pretty much everything, the skeleton that just holds all of your content is what we're going to be styling within that base folder. So base folder, as I said, the base directory contains all of the visual styles. So again, not layout, just visual styles, fonts and colors and typography and all that kind of stuff that aren't layout, So we're not talking about how things are laid out, what's first and what's last and all that kind of stuff. And it's not specific to a component. It's not a component that I'm going to reuse. It's not like a search widget. It's not like a news block. It's not like any of that kind of stuff, whatever you're doing on your site. So our base folder, HTML, page, vendor. Sometimes I broke out font face as a separate one. I mean, again, these aren't set in stone. I'm sure it'll change for me next project, but this is a great place to start, something to use. So next thing let's talk about is layout. Layout is near and dear to my heart because this is a huge shift for me over what I used to do a year ago, or even probably 6 months ago. The first time I heard about this, I was like, it's crazy. This would never work. It's completely separating all of the layout from your markup, or not markup, sorry. All of your layout from your actual styling. Everything. I'm not even talking about like how the columns are laid out, but like if the pictures flow to left and the contents flow to right. Everything abstracted away. I thought it was crazy. I was like, nah, it would never work. Not going to do it. Finally gave it a shot, and it's wonderful how liberating this constraint is because of what it does for your project. So let me kind of show you the different kind of layouts that you can do and the different folders I would typically kind of break stuff into. For one, we'll have a page layout. And again, as I said, we have that page folder that talks about how the page looks. We also have a page partial that talks about how the page is laid out. And I usually, and this is kind of just a side note, I usually say like page underscore layout. So everything in my layouts folder is typically underscore layout, which means that I've got page as a partial, and I have page underscore layout as a partial. And if you use like Sublime Text or anything with a good searching function, it's great. Because you do search page, and layout. And it's really easy to find the corresponding items that are the same name, but one's tacked on with layout. So I'll do that with other stuff as well. So here's what my layout would do for my page. It's basically header, 100%, and 3 columns, and whatever my percentages be, whatever kind of layout tool you use. Sass has got a lot of them, Singularity, Suzy, ZenGrids. I know Bourbon's got a good one. So there's lots of ways to do it. But doing layout separate is just, it's really, really helpful in this process. So this is just page. If you stopped here and like went on your merry way, you really wouldn't save yourself that much. I mean, just move this up into that page partial I had before and forget about the layouts folder. To really do it, you're going to need to go a little bit further. You need to say, okay, I've got some widgets on the side, some news stories on the side there, and the image is always going to be on the left, and the text and the share stuff is going to be pushed to the right. Yes, I could go into my component and say float image left and float the other thing right and do my things and all that kind of stuff. But that wouldn't give you that separation. So what I'm arguing, trying, and doing is actually abstracting all of these out into that layout folder. So whenever I go to style something, I'm not worrying about like where it is in the left or right spectrum at all. The only thing I care about is the way it looks and maybe a little vertical rhythm. And I'll talk about that a little bit with components. But what this allows me to do is keep everything on the grid. You know, if you've never seen a site that's like fully grid, like even the images are inside that grid. It's wonderful. And from a responsive standpoint, it makes it really easy when you know this is actually a column. So you know this thing actually bends and floats with that column, and you can expect that. You do like an image width 100%, then you do an auto height, and it'll just stay within that column, and however big the column is, it'll work. And our gutter there is going to be that same gutter that we use everywhere in the site. We don't have to go, 15 pixels, 10 pixels. How much gutter should we use here? You never do that. It's all within a layout. So everything's layout mixing. And then you also have layouts for like UI elements, like a navigation or something like that. You might separate these out just because they're slightly different. They're not reusable elements, but you can certainly use that same grid to lay out your navigation because it's going to have to change as well. It's going to have to go from showing 4 items across to when it gets smaller, showing 2 and then 2. So it all needs to be in layouts. And the more you can use a single system to do all that, the more all of your columns, like that column there between the 2 pictures, I bet that's the exact same size as between the picture and the text in that little story block. So using layout for all of that left to right stuff gives you just, it's a lot of power. Make sure I'm not missing, okay, no phone calls for pizza. So by separating layout from style, we ensure adherence to that grid so that every gap is that same gap. And the beautiful thing is when the customer comes back and says, you know, this thing is just too loose, man. I mean, it's the space between everything is just too much. Can you tighten it up? You don't have to go through your entire site and change 15 pixels to 13 pixels everywhere in your entire site because it's going to be a mess. Because sometimes it's going to have padding, sometimes not, sometimes it's margin, and it's just going to be, if you have one way to lay stuff out, you have one way to change it. You change one variable, you change your layout variables, you're done. And it's ridiculously awesome. So a consistent grid and sets foundation for a responsive layout. So it really gets you set up to really easily, you know, if that little sidebar thing needs to eventually change its layout to have a full-size image with text underneath, you're already set. You already have a grid wrapped around that thing. And you change your grid variables, you're done. You put in some other grid mix-ins within your media queries, and it works. Again, how it works obviously depends on how you're doing it. We can talk about that, but that's the power of it. So again, in our components, we are talking about typically breaking it up into like, oh, sorry. We're talking about components now. All right, in layout, we're talking about page, component, UI, breaking it up into those different bits, just so you know when you're adding something or trying to find something. Again, everything is placed in a place for everything, and you know, keep our house nice and clean and put away our toys. And this is perfect. It's almost 7, and I have components to do. So components is really the meat and potatoes. I mean, really, this is all getting to great, but our website still has no style to it whatsoever. How to actually tie all this together and make a website that looks like something, that actually has branding, that actually has typography. How does all that get attached? And it's all through components. So components are standalone, reusable, and have no knowledge of the parent container. This is huge. This is really huge. And the faster you get this, the faster you're going to be making really awesome components. The idea here is it should not matter if this component is in the sidebar. It shouldn't matter if it gets put in the footer. It shouldn't matter if it gets put in the content, or the header, or in the navigation. It could go in the side of the navigation. It should work, function, and behave properly regardless of where you put it. And we have pizza. You want to go down for pizza? I might be running because I just hung up on him. No, it's paid for. Yeah. Thank you, Drupalize me. All right. One more plug, right? They're on time. That's nice. Okay. So when you do this, when you actually have components that'll fit anywhere, you're set up for really anything that happens down the road. You change from a 2-column layout to a 3-column layout. Ah, crap. You know, that has a different class than that. When I put this over here, it breaks because it doesn't have that class. So what I'm talking about is every component, like the root class of that component should be the name of the component. It should never be sidebar. It should never be content. It should never be anything about where it is, because that makes it unusable in any other space. So that's the idea of having no knowledge of the parent container. It shouldn't matter. It just goes into the box. It doesn't matter how big the box is or where the box is. It's just going to fill up that space and work properly. One caveat to this, and it's something that I think the industry is working on and trying to figure out, is the idea of of component media queries. Is that the right way to say it? Or element media queries? Because the problem is, if you have, say, like, you can't tell how big something is. This is kind of the problem. So if you're a full desktop view, that widget is going to use whatever your desktop view media queries are. There's no way to say, if this widget is in the content, we'll open up and float things and move things around. But if you put it in something smaller, shrink down and like drop things below and do all that kind of stuff. So there's no way to have a like media query like on the element that's in. And it'd be wonderful to have, and hopefully we'll get something in the future that'll make it easier. That'll make these even more reusable. Right now, sometimes you run into that, and there are a few ways to work around it, and otherwise it's just kind of a pain in the butt. But you got to work with what you got. So here are a bunch of components we have on the page. Again, our lovely Mashable, Maid of Honor, apparently goes M&M style. It was a pretty exciting day in tech, apparently. So we kind of see the same thing. So the little new stuff up top. Every single one of those is a component, and it's 3 of them. You could maybe argue that that's one component with 3 items in it. More than one way to skin a cat. It just kind of depends on the architecture and whatnot. But that's going to be a component, and we're going to have one file. All it does is describe how that thing looks. Again, not how it's laid out, but just how it looks. I guess to back up, we are going to have something that's going to tell how that lays out. But in the components folder, all we're going to be saying is this is going to have certain treatment for the picture. So it's a drop shadow, it's a border radius, whatever. And the text is going to have whatever font sizes, and then we're going to use whatever below for like our icons and font sizes and colors. And that's all that you're doing. It's already laid out. It's already set on the grid. All we're doing is probably just extending. Like that's a small title. Say like that's probably like an H3 or an H4 or something like that. Or our like, new stuff title is what we're calling it. So in that partial, all I'm really going to do is extend that other title. I'm not even going to put any styles in there. I'm going to go to the partial. I'm going to say, whatever selector I can use to get to that. I'm going to say, go extend that title. I'm done. Oh, apparently I need to sign.
And let's take
to yes.
Thank Drupal.
One more time. And Hot Lips Pizza. Thank you very much. So that's what your component's going to be. So, and again, if we go to this next one, these 2 right here, they could. You have to look at your markup. They might be the same component, honestly. And again, what we're talking about is completely like devoid of knowledge of your parent container. This guy should look the same, whether it's the next big thing or what's hot. We've got a full-size image. We've got whatever text treatment's on the little like region or whatever it's called. We've got a title that's probably going to be extending the same title. And just in this case, we've got some extra markup of content below. And this, we've got some extra markup of a little graph. So we could probably make that as into a single component. And then no matter where that component sat, it would just fill up that space, and everything would work, hopefully, flawlessly. But again, we would extend, maybe use, like here's a little icon. We might use a little mix-in to put an icon into there. And that's really all the component would be. It's just attaching those styles to each of the sections. So the really nice thing about this is when you're actually doing the styling, when you've got like these tickets that you're like, okay, I've got an unthemed site and I need to theme it, you can create those tickets really modularly as well. And we're finding this and actually having large conversations about like GitHub ticketing systems. How would we do it with this method in mind? And what we're doing is we're breaking up each of these tickets into really simply that widget. It's not a sidebar. We're not worried about a sidebar. We're worried about let's get that one widget styled. And when it's done, move on to the next one. So it also helps with ticketing as a project manager. And how do you organize what gets done and when is it done? Because if everything is completely independent of where it is and is completely independent of what's around it, once it's styled, it's done. You don't have to worry about something else coming in and encroaching on its space. So that's the beautifulness of this system. So perfect. I've got a couple slides to wrap up, and then we can eat some pizza. Usually what I do when I start, especially when I don't have the theme to be theming against, but I have markup, is I'll go through and just make some naked partials. And really what that means is envision everyone in the room naked. No, just kidding. It's to go through and create a partial for everything, all the content in your site. Go through, I've got these kind of blocks on for news items. I've got this content block. I've got these 3 widgets over here, and make partials for each one of those. And then go through and just find all of your markup and find good selectors for each of those items in the markup. So you've got this naked component that's just ready to go. I've got all my hooks. If I need to add in like some pseudo classes or something, they're all there. I know how to target each of those components. Back. There we go. So this is a partial, and I've got like image. I've got a div with a class. I've got an H2. I've got a paragraph with the class, and I've got like a div with the class. Get all that in. You're set. And then whenever that theme comes along and you've got styles to apply to it, you're just basically like painting with your paintbrush at that point. Like, let's apply this style. Let's apply that style. And it makes it a really easy process. At least that's what I've found in my experience. So again, naked component is just merely a collection of all the DOM elements put together in one file so that you're ready to basically tackle each one of those items and style them. So if done properly, each component should simply be a list of extends, mixins, and maybe a little vertical rhythm, depending on how you're doing all your vertical rhythm. So when I go into my Sass folder, and I go down to components, and I go down to like blog reel or something like that, I'll open it up, and all I'm going to see is all those naked selectors. All of those, tapping into that, tapping into that, tapping into that, tapping. Okay, I've got all my selectors. I'm hitting all the stuff in the DOM, and then okay, that's going to extend the title. That's going to extend a button treatment. That's going to like include a font icon, all the way down. If there's any styles in there, like if something's colored blue, ask yourself, why is it blue here? Like, are there other elements that also need to be blue? Is this a variable that I need to be abstracting out because the blue is used somewhere? Like, why is there any styles in a partial? And it's really kind of an odd thing when you come to realize it is anytime you have something in there, that's the only place it is. And if you're trying to create a system, which is what we're trying to do, we're trying to create a system, is really those styles don't belong in a component. It's really about connecting your system to the DOM is what these components are all about. And it sounds like it's something, now that I talk about it out loud, it's probably something I could do an entire talk on just by itself. But that's what the structure allows you to do. Break everything up into, let's see, do I have like a, no, I don't. Hey, there we go. Break everything up into all of your global, basically all your bootstrap folder. Being able to do kind of all of your framing stuff, all of if you took out all the content from the site, what would you have? That's basically your base and typography and whatnot. And then with your layout, separating all the layout. I mean, ask yourself, if anytime I float something, could I do this with layout? And should I do this with layout? The answer is probably yes, because in most cases you can. Because it allows you to really easily keep everything in one place. It allows you to stick to that grid. It allows you to use that grid system to make everything the same sizes. And when you change stuff, which inevitably things change, it makes life easier. And lastly, the components. I'll try and post maybe some examples of like what some of my component folders look like. But that component is really where it just ties everything together. You've got your DOM selectors, and you've got all of your extends and mixins, and you've kind of just mashed them together. You're just connecting the pieces, and at the end of it, you have a fully styled site. And when it happens, it's a beautiful thing, because it's easy to find things, it's easy to change things, and it's really easy to maintain and update the site, and it's all within just the power of Sass. So again, that's why I think Sass is so powerful in what we do. We don't have just one big sheet anymore. You know, we actually get to create systems. We get to let the designers actually write some of the CSS. I don't care, as long as they're writing good CSS, I'm going to design a system around that that's going to make our site purr. And that is the goal of getting your Sass in line. Awesome. So thank you. That's my presentation. I was like, I don't know how to end it. How do you end a presentation? Yeah, let's go ahead and stop broadcasting.